Hi, everybody. I'm Candid Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate, leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. It is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Don't forget to subscribe to Candid Frank Live, Stanisci 1030 on YouTube, now on CFL Talk. Joining me is David Morassutti. Hey, David, how you doing?
Good. Back from the hiatus.
Yeah, I don't know the Hades hiatus, the heat and prostration that happens within that heat. Want to welcome everybody for coming to the program. We should have a lot of fun today. I tell you, we have missed a couple of weeks, but I tell you, this past week made up for it. Let me tell you. So the game looked well under control. We'll start with the Argos, of course. That's the team we cover, and the big story is they literally had Calgary on the ropes. I don't know what happened.
Well, really, I mean, yeah, through three quarters, the Argos looked like they were on their way to winning that game. But you can't win a game if you don't score points in the second half. Like, your defense can be good, but I think the defense could only do so much when your offense, especially all 7 possessions, I believe, that the Argos had in the second half, led to a punt. They could not put points on the board. And I don't know about you, but it doesn't matter how big of a lead you have in the CFL. You give your opponent multiple opportunities to come back into a game. Eventually, they are going to come back into the game. That's what happened. The Argos, again, it all comes down to having that full team game, right? When one thing doesn't go for you, can the rest step up to provide the support? That has happened. It has happened, in the last few games for this team, but you can only rely on that so much. You need everything to be working for you, whether that's the offense getting points, the defense making stops, special teams giving you some big plays. That didn't happen, right? I think all three phases had their struggles, and credit Calgary. I think that was one of the more well-coached games I've seen from Calgary this year, especially in that second half. I think Dave Dickinson said told the sideline reporter for the Calgary radio, like, there's some players playing for jobs going into the second half. I think there was a bit of a realization that there need to be a better effort from this team in the second half, and they got it. One team raised their game, the other team unfortunately wasn't able to.
It is said that in the Canadian Football League that no lead is safe.
No.
There's a reason for that, because no lead is safe in the Canadian Football League. The other thing I'll point to, and then I could add some other comments that support what you're saying or whatever, but I think the biggest thing that is a surprise for this Argo team this year, the first few years that they've been coached by Ryan Dinwiddie, whether it's the staff or Ryan Dinwiddie, or whether it's the players or the leadership in the locker room, I'm not sure which. I can guess, but the second half seems to have been in the past always, or for at least for the most part, the better half of the game for the Toronto Argonauts in the past 2-3 years. This year, that's not true. This year, the second half is problematic for them. And yesterday was, it wasn't even the second half. It was the fourth quarter, which, they abandoned their football skills, abandoned their offense, defense, and special teams, as you said. And essentially that's the thing that undid them, is that they just could not come out with a second half game that replicated the first half and or muted the advances that Calgary made in the second half. For me, the biggest thing that the Argos had a hard time dealing with, David, was the speed of the Calgary offense.
Yeah, I mean, Calgary knew that the best way to beat the strong defense is to get into the secondary. They like with this Argos team, like Montreal did it a few weeks ago where they threw a lot of underneath things and Toronto just was not making plays. They got much better at that. So really if you're a team trying to beat this Argos defense, you got to push it deep and you got to hope you find one-on-one matchups. And that's what Calgary did. They exploited some one-on-one matchups and especially the one touchdown by I'm blanking on the name, but McFadden goes for the ball, doesn't get the ball, but he also doesn't touch the receiver who's down,
Yeah.
and he's able to walk in.
Eccles.
Yes, Eccles, right? Those are things that can't happen, right? Like those are mistakes that will kill you as a defense. And so if I'm Ryan Dinwiddie, those are things you're going to point to. We can't make these mistakes. We're not good enough. He said it to me earlier in the week. Like the mistakes we're making, we're not good enough right now to overcome them. And I think that says a lot about this team right now, right? Last year, they could make mistakes, but they were good enough to overcome them. This year, they're not good enough to make the mistakes that they've made in games, right? The big one too, I don't think it's talked about enough, was that penalty, the defensive pass interference. To me, that was a penalty that changed the momentum for Calgary. They believe that they could come back in the game because of that penalty.
Yeah, for me, momentum is well, it is the biggest thing going in football because it's made for momentum because you get possession of the ball and you can create your own momentum on offense. And then the thing is, if you don't, and the defense can basically create momentum in the opposite direction very quickly. What we saw with the Argos is their offense in the first half looked totally different than the second half offense. And once again, it ends up being that the inexperience of their quarterback. I know the coach, as you know, in the post game, Coach Dinwiddie took the blame for the plan was a bad plan. It wasn't the kind of plan that helped his team win. This one's on him. He made some bad coaching decisions. That's well and good, but at some point, the team has to not just rally behind the coach, which in this case, the players tried to do in the post game. But really, they have to take the control of the game from their coach, from the other team. And the Argos didn't do that. They were a passenger in the second half, in the fourth quarter especially. They did not do anything to control their destiny. There was no big play by the Argos, whether it was defensive or special teams or defense. And essentially, when you were talking about you've got to play three phases of the game, and then you were also mentioning that you could play a couple of the phases and still win. But definitely when you play none of the phases, well, you're not going to win.
Well, that was the issue, right? Calgary has always been a bad matchup for Toronto, in the trenches, right? Especially considering the Argos. I mentioned this actually. I was on the radio today talking about the game, and like you have a Calgary team who, as a defense, had 8 sacks coming into this game. 8 all year. One of the lowest totals in the league. The Argos actually have the lowest. The Argos top in the league with 14, if I'm not are tied for first with 14. Calgary now tied Toronto in one game because they had 6 sacks. And look, I point that the offensive line got moved, they got pushed around a little bit. Cameron Dukes, I think, got caught holding the ball a little too long, as we've seen him do this year. Like it's a culmination of just something was off, right, with how this team was playing, and to me, there was a bit of a missing leader to get them out of it, right? Who's the one that's going to make the play to get out of it? Ryan Dinwiddie mentioned he probably should have ran the ball more. The fault in that was when you have a lead, and one way you can bleed a clock is if you have a good running game. But Calgary was doing a good job, negating that. Toronto did too. Like Toronto made
They stood up
Calgary,
Carey at the end there, and I think they hurt him really good.
And they might have hurt Janari and Gant really good there too. I didn't get a chance to find out his status. We'll probably find out this week when they go back to practice. But like they got bullied. They really did get bullied. It reminded me of the last time these two teams played each other. Now, at the same time, the Argos certainly can bounce back. We have seen their ability to bounce back, but a lot has to be corrected in order for them to bounce back. And if you're Calgary, you're feeling pretty good about what you're able to do because you beat them with your quarterback, which hasn't always been the way that Calgary does things, especially this year.
Well, in recent memory, in the Dinwiddie era, when the Argos lose, it has a lot to do with their lack of physicality and or the overwhelming physicality of their opposition. They lost a playoff game against Hamilton because they weren't physical enough and weren't able to withstand the physicalness of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Last year, they lost against Montreal. Montreal beat them into submission. And that may sound harsh, but I don't think it's not descriptive of what happened. And in this game, they were kind of beaten into submission in this game as well. The physical will of this team was not as strong as it's been in the past. And, the big plays, the physical nature of the game and football, I think, David, both of you and I have noticed in this game, the games that we watch, it seems to be kind of a physical sport, doesn't it? And if you're not physical in this sport, you have a hard time winning because you literally, we say this, but there's a lot of truth to it. And underline it here for the Calgary Stampeders yesterday. You have to impose your will on the opposition. And Calgary did that to Toronto in the fourth quarter after Toronto had done it to them early in the game. And then just somehow, I don't know, took their foot off the accelerator, didn't deal with what Calgary was throwing at them, couldn't handle the speed of which, there were a lot of those crossing patterns and those using the length of the width of the field to make plays.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow the Argo defense couldn't keep up with that. Those runs across the field were successful for Calgary in the fourth quarter and led to the victory. And, I guess, again, there's a thing about adjustments, and football's all about adjustments, and the Argos didn't make them.
No, and the Calgary was getting to that second, third level. Toronto, I thought they were doing that in the first half. Cameron Dukes, whether it was running the ball, a little bit of Carey running the ball, obviously a turnover certainly helps in that regard too. But you also look at, the interception certainly helped that because it put them in a scoring position. But I look at the Argos' ability to get receivers in those matchups, those one-on-one matchups, or, getting open in the middle of the field, right? You got to you said it. You got the width of the field. You have to use that width of the field to open things up. And really, there wasn't that ability. Like DeVars Daniels, they took a shot late in the fourth quarter with them down. It was a short. They only needed like 6 yards to get a first down. They decided to run a deep ball because is Calgary expecting it? Probably not. But they didn't convert, right? And it's been kind of the MO for this Argos team that there's opportunities. They're just missing those opportunities. And when you miss enough of those chances, it comes back to bite you in the end.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you don't get unlimited amounts of chances. That may happen to look that way in games. When you have a game that it appears that you're dominating a team, it's because you're taking advantage of all the opportunities that you're given, and the other team just isn't. And this is what happened. We had a tale of two halves, pun intended. The first half was one game, and the second half was another game. And then one thing that we're finding with this quarterback, agree or not, I don't know, but the experience lacking in the quarterback for the Argos when the pressure gets really heavy. He's had 3 game-winning runs at the end of a game, right? He's won 3 games with last possession. Um, this one here, there was an opportunity to do that, David, and it. I don't know about his reads to throw into a defender jumping in the air, a knockdown in that kind of situation. You would think that would be one of the things that the coach and the quarterback would be on the same page and understand that you've got to avoid that. You know, it just wasn't. It wasn't the kind of final rush, if you will, that you'd want to see that they practice. I can't believe that's how they practice. You know, the 2 or 3 minute drill.
Well, that's it, right? When we saw like in any of those 2 minute, 3 minute drills, the thing is that Calgary knew exactly where they needed to be. They need to be in that second and third level, and but the problem is that when your offensive line is getting beat like it is, it just changes the way that the quarterback kind of reads the play. He might think he has time, he might not really have time, and then he's out making mistakes because he's not really seeing the field the way it should be. I look at that fourth quarter, especially when Calgary was making their push, and there was one. I think it was after the Calgary touchdown, and I said Toronto is going to need to figure it out. This is a huge drive for this Toronto offense to stop the bleeding. Right? There was the simple as
they bled out. That's for sure.
Right. Like they did nothing to stop the bleeding. They couldn't get a first down, or they couldn't avoid a punt. They couldn't even get a field goal. Like you get a field goal in that fourth quarter, maybe things you breathe a little easier. You're not feel like you're being suffocated, right? As that play calling, as Ryan Dinwiddie mentioned it, I don't think it's all play calling. I think that's a coach trying to save face with its players, and he's called out his team quite a bit in post games. Certain groups for not performing up to snuff, and maybe he just felt like, what, like I need to be the one to own it. That's all fine and dandy, but but how does that change what went wrong, right? You can take blame for something, but ultimately, what are you going to do differently to avoid that situation?
Reggie Begelton, before or at the end of the first half, if anybody was watching at that point when he was interviewed, and he basically said, well, watch how we come out in the second half. And he did it in such a matter-of-fact way. It wasn't like one of those rah things. He said, we got the second half. We'll have the second half. We'll show. Just watch what we're going to do in the second half. And he didn't just talk the talk. He walked the talk. He had 8 receptions. He led the team in yards. He was a key component in making that comeback happen. And that, by definition, I think is what when you talk about leadership that you were saying earlier in your first part of the conversation here, he brought what the Argos were lacking, and that is a kind of leadership on the field, not just the talk, but the actual action that leaders do perform. And I think one of the things that they miss more than anything, I think, is Wynton McManus. They didn't have anybody else without him there. They didn't have somebody that does that. We all know that he does. He's a real motivator on the sidelines as well as on the field, and he makes big plays. The Argos didn't have anybody that did that. And, usually it's the quarterback that makes the big plays with the receiver or the running back, and he does some stuff. But there wasn't an answer of greatness by any of the players on the Argonauts in the second half.
No, and yeah, you look at all the players that this Argos team is missing. I think I counted almost 8 regulars on I think 8 on the defense that they don't have playing right now. A couple on the defensive line.
No, you're not making excuses for the team, right?
I'm not making excuses because every team is dealing with injuries.
Absolutely.
Teams, right? But it certainly does not. It does help when you have a player like that available that can play for you at the end of the day as well. But
what you're highlighting is the next man up mentality.
Yeah, there would need to be a little more of that, right? Like, you had guys making plays early in the game, but when the game was on the line, there wasn't anyone making that play. That was missing from that defense, especially in the fourth quarter, with Calgary really pushing. Like none of the guys up front were putting enough pressure on Arbuckle. The Argos didn't record a sack. Like that's when you can rely on the defense to get a sack and help, put them in negative situations or things like that. That didn't happen, and that's an element that you're going to need if you want to be a championship team, right? You need that. You need that player that's going to be able to step up in that moment and make those plays. They didn't have it, unfortunately.
They
And
should.
yeah, but they have players capable of doing it. It's not like they're, there's not really anyone here. There are. It's just, they got to go out and execute. And I think that's the problem there too. Is there's just that execution hasn't been there, even in the small details of the game.
Yeah, they need a little more, a little more positive stuff. And the best running back for the Argos yesterday was Cameron Dukes.
Well, that's what confused me. When you're an offense that's built a lot also on the running game, like let's not mistake it. The Argos are definitely built to run, with the way that they've played. They have two other running backs, like Deonta McMahon got some passes. He didn't have a single carry. Dan Adeboboye, it continues to bewilder me how he's not getting more play, considering the investment that they've made in him. And I think he brings a different element with the power, the ability to really help the offensive line and really push forward. Like to me, that's a missing element there too.
It's got to be something to do with health.
I don't know if it's health
It's
or
not
just,
like all of a sudden they decided he's not their guy. At the end of last year, before he got hurt, he was trending, in my mind, as a future running back.
I really don't know what it is. Maybe that's a question I have to ask the coach, and wondering what does this player need to do to get more touches, right? And so those are moments, right, that you need to have your top players or just your depth too to step up. Have other people.
Absolutely, but that's really, the Canadian Football League. I started by saying no lead is safe. That's an axiom when it comes to CFL. The other thing is next man up. The players that are available to the Canadian Football League are very talented. It really is basically help them understand how the Canadian game works, but they've got the talent to begin with. There's a dearth of talent in the football world, and if you pick the right guys to pick up the game quick enough, the next man up is something that we had with Calgary for years, and actually with the Argos the first couple of years with Dinwiddie here, that some of the most key players on the team did not present themselves as key players until like a year ago or 2 years ago. That Grey Cup team was loaded with guys that didn't have a real big reputation as great Canadian Football League players. We had a kid that was Rookie of the Year that wasn't even a football player for a while before he started playing football. So we know it's possible. We know it's possible. Right now, it's not working. It's not falling in favor of the Argos, where the next man up is playing as well or better than the guy that they're replacing.
Well, that's it, right? There's a couple of things that need to go your way in these situations. One being health. Two is just finding guys that's stepping up that maybe you didn't expect. The other teams don't expect. It's kind of like Montreal had a little bit of that last year, where guys started to step up at the right time, or they added players at the right time. Right? It takes one or two players to really make a difference. And for Toronto, I think it's more so on the offense.
Yeah.
Like everyone's wondering where's DeVars Daniels? Where it's a fair question. He's also up there in age, right? He's not going to be your leading receiver. That was supposed to be DeMonte Coxey. they've got guys coming back from injuries who I feel like there's going to be a little bit of a time to get them up to speed. You got a rookie in there, and Kevin Mittal, who's trying, but you can tell that they're not comfortable giving him too much of a workload right now. So there's just a lot of question marks of what needs to change, but it's also a matter of who. Okay, you want things to change, but who's going to be the one to step up to provide that change?
Yeah, the biggest example of change necessary for the Argos, and we talked about physicality a little bit at the end of that game, to watch the defender for the Calgary Stampeders push the offensive lineman right into the quarterback about 8 yards. I mean, that can't happen. I'm not trying to put an offensive lineman, I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, and I don't mean it as a personal attack, but the fact is, an offensive line has to stand its ground. And the Argo offensive line, like you said earlier, that's one example where we saw a sack. Not that it wasn't the sack where a guy, a guy that wasn't covered runs through the line. It was a guy that literally pushed a lineman one-on-one into the quarterback. That is a kind of intimidation and or physical outmatched situation that, as a football team, you're starting to look for another player. I mean, that's the kind of play that can get you removed off the team, to be that beaten so badly in that way. And and I don't mean, I'm the only reason I'm not saying the name, because I don't think it has as much to do about the individual as it has to do with the team and their inability to, as a line, protect each other in whatever way they need to. Football's made of guys who dominate. How many defensive linemen have we seen who take on 2 or 3 offensive line members, and they got their hands full, and that frees up somebody else? So it's teamwork. I'm not trying to attack an individual lineman, but that sight, that did not look good, and that spoke. And then the hit that Carey took, the hit, as you said, that were administered, really showed that Calgary was there, ready to play. And there's a word down south that they used, the want to. They had the want to. The Argos did not.
Well, yeah, and I look at from an Argos perspective, when you like this offensive line was heralded so much last year that in a way I think teams are trying to make it a point to really attack that offensive line now.
And they added to it, well, in the off season.
Right? And so that's the confusing part to me. Like, look, do I expect the offensive line to have a historic year again? Probably not. I think the talent around the league has gotten better at really getting to the quarterback. It's been real apparent that's been something that has always kind of been the crux of a lot of teams, is their ability to rush the quarterback, and some teams really struggling to protect the quarterback. I think if you're the Argos, that's something you want to fix. You don't now, look, when you have a quarterback that's willing to move around in the pocket like a Cameron Dukes, it's only also so much an offensive lineman can do in those situations as well, right? That's, I think, also a change. And I've also said, like, the best way to counteract the pass rush, run the ball, which the Argos had been doing, or you got to get that ball out of the quarterback's hands a lot faster than what the Argos have been doing right now.
Yeah, and then when you look at what a good sign of it, and I think you alluded to it, but you weren't specific. But I'll be specific. How many field goals did the Argos get in that game yesterday?
We got a single. That's it.
No field goals. No field goals means you did not flip the field at all, because you got a pretty good field goal kicker there, right?
No, I do, and
he didn't get any field goals. So that tells you the offense didn't even, it's like a boxer. They didn't even have any kind of punches to throw that kept the opponent, off their feet a little bit. It was a very lukewarm offensive effort that didn't produce even field goals. And a field goal would have made a difference in that game, because the last field goal was by Calgary was just because the Argos failed to get a first down at the end of the game and just threw the game away at that point.
Yeah, well, that was the problem. There is that when they only got 1 point in the second half. And yeah, I was talking to someone. They said like they got more points from their punter in the second half. Like it just really showed their struggles to push the ball down the field, and that can't happen in the CFL. In my opinion, it cannot happen because offenses have gotten better in this league. Like, don't get me wrong, they're not, we're not seeing 40 plus points every game, but we're seeing the ability of opponents to take advantage of mistakes. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough.
Yep.
Is the ability of the offense to take advantage of the short field. And the Argos didn't do that either. They didn't flip the field enough to put their offense in a better position either.
We'll have to stand back a little bit. Using this game as the only gauge of their season, it'll lead Argo fans to commit carry. So let's step back a little bit. Now, with this comment, I'm going to step back a little bit, step right back to the beginning of the season, and remember and think, Argo fans, anybody who knows the Canadian Football League, when their number one quarterback was suspended for 9 games. If I had told you, David, that they'd be 4-4 with their backup quarterback, that actually wouldn't be a bad result. This is something that we're losing, and that's not, I don't mean this to demean the quarterback, right? It's not about Dukes. It's about his ability, his experience, and the need in the Canadian Football League to have an experienced, truly number one quarterback. And so my statement is very clear. If you expected the Argos to not skip a beat with him at quarterback and their number one guy that clearly is number one, salary says his value to the team. How much they pay him, it shows the value to the team.
Yeah.
So now that guy, you pull him off the lineup, and you've talked about injuries and stuff, and I'm good with, and because we don't want to make excuses for the Argos, the injuries, everybody has to put up with that, right? Because that's just football. It's a physical game. But if you're playing your season with a backup quarterback and not the starting quarterback in the Canadian Football League, your season doesn't have much chance. My point is that Dukes has done a good enough job to keep this team with their head above water, barely above water. If they win the next game, above water. If they don't, they'll be below water. But the point is, being 4-4 at this point of the season with your starting quarterback coming back, it's not that bad a position, because I don't want to come across here being totally negative. The positive side of this is they have their number one quarterback on the horizon. And when I spoke to Dinwiddie yesterday, I was just wondering, is there any distraction with your number one quarterback coming back? And I meant it not just in the locker room. I meant it in the quarterback room. I meant it in the team as a team. Is there a distraction? He said no. I take him at his word. I might not agree with him, but, I can't see it not being a distraction, because the whole mentality of this game for them and the way the offense works, he stirs the drink. So, Kelly's on his way back. He's going to take over a team if the league deems his 9-game suspension stands and stays at that point. There isn't an additional amount of games that are going to be tacked on, of course, based on his behavior up until that point. If he is the quarterback that they think he is, they're not in bad shape. We haven't even seen Labor Day yet.
I think you're right. I think that gets lost a little bit here in that, how different would things look if they'd had Chad Kelly starting from the very beginning. And, it's like a team, it's like an NHL team losing their starting goaltender. right? You just hope that you can tread water enough, and you're right. But
He doesn't
problem,
lose games for you. Yeah.
yeah, but the problem here is this is like not like a 2-3 game situation. This isn't even a 6 game situation like we were seeing. We might have likely have seen from Montreal or BC with their quarterbacks. Or even Saskatchewan. We're talking about half of your season, right? And so to be 500 is good, but that also means you've only got half a season, maybe even longer, or less time than that, to hit the gas. Now, in some ways, that might be good because this Argos team was so good, and then they felt like they were a bit on cruise control. So maybe having something to really play for might be even the best thing because I don't know about you, as good as having that first bye is, having momentum is even better.
Listen, I'm not in the business of unselling tickets to the Canadian Football League. Okay. I'm not in the business of unselling tickets to the Canadian Football League. But the truth is, the season doesn't start till Labor Day, mentally, physically, and in reality. And last year's Grey Cup victory was a part of a repetition in the Canadian Football League, where the team that goes out at the end of the season on a run has a very good chance to win the Grey Cup. So, everything that's happened till today, it's very important because you would rather be Calgary than Winnipeg. You would rather be Toronto than Hamilton. Even though it's only 2 wins better, the Argos are only 2 wins better than Hamilton. The same thing is true with Winnipeg and Calgary. That's not much to overcome. So, how these teams adjust going into Labor Day is going to be the telling tale. But one thing I saw yesterday, and I was very impressed with, is the way Calgary's team responded in the second half, the way Calgary and their quarterback. We can talk and make it sound like the Argos blew the game, but the mayor. I think he was reelected as the mayor of Calgary. He was really good yesterday in the second half. He proved that he is that guy that Bo Levi Mitchell left to give the starting job under center.
That's what they were expecting from him, right? That was kind of the expectation that Jake Maier would be the next guy. Now, were we expecting to be exactly the same? Probably would have been a little fool's gold to expect to come in and replace someone that's for sure Hall of Famer. At the same time, we're also looking at, a guy who has a lot going for him in terms of didn't have exactly he had pressure, but in Calgary it's different because they always have a good surround system, right? It's always a system that surrounds the quarterback. You're not just asking him to do it all. There's supposed to be components that work around the quarterback. But what the issue has been when it hasn't all been there, right? The quarterback hasn't been able to make the plays, right, or put the team in negative situations. That's really had been Jake Maier's issue. Is he had? It's not like he had lost some games, but he didn't do enough to win them games either in the past, right? You can throw for a bunch of yards. That's certainly true, but you can throw even the touchdowns had always been kind of a problem for him too. He wasn't really getting those big plays for touchdowns. But I think that's been the biggest change I've seen from him this year. Is the interceptions are still there. It's better, but he's also putting his team in better positions with bigger plays, and he's making those plays. Especially you watch that game yesterday. There's some big throws that he made.
Yeah, he gave chances for receivers to make catches, and they made the big play. Well, let's depart from the loss the Argos had to Calgary. Calgary, the victory they had, they're well earned. My highlight of the weekend was I'll call it satisfying because we have spent the last few years wondering out loud repeatedly Where's Trey Ford? Well, apparently he turned up in Edmonton.
How long have we been saying that this team, get out of your own way in a little way? You have a fan base that, you know what, last year was brutal. That was a brutal year. But you know what? One of the highlights was seeing a young Canadian quarterback, even take out the Canadian part of it. I even want to take the Canadian part out for a second. A young quarterback showing that he can make you a competitive team. He may not have won a bunch of games, but he won more games in his short stint last year than a lot of other quarterbacks you had there before. That's the first thing I had noted. Then what do? You say, we still don't think this guy is ready. We're going to bring in a veteran guy in McLeod Bethel Thompson, which seemed to justify the whole not playing Trey Ford. They still can't win football games. He comes in and they have, an outing that I think just an explosion, right? A good Saskatchewan team, a good coach Saskatchewan team. You put up 22 points in the fourth quarter. You rush for, if I'm not mistaken, I'm just double checking here. You rush for 276 yards when they couldn't run the ball worth a damn up until this point. Your quarterback, yeah, he threw an interception, but he made more positive plays than negative plays with two touchdowns himself. You show that maybe you got a little more with Javon Leaf than just a returner.
Holy mackerel, 169 yards and 12 carries. What else do you want from a running back?
Yeah, I think even like a good chunk of that came off of 2 plays, but those 2 plays led to touchdowns, so I can't even go against that. Tevin Jones, monster game from him. And all of that is because I think that it's time that this Edmonton team realizes they might actually have a good quarterback in Trey Ford and let the guy play.
You think?
At this point, I kept saying it. What do you have to lose by playing him?
Well, losing.
No, I mean you're already losing games. You're owing.
You could lose losing. Is that a problem? Losing,
the only thing you'd always be worried about is you're worried about maybe they'll destroy the confidence of the kid.
Oh, well,
you're also destroying the confidence not playing him either when he's been waiting and waiting, and I'm just like really they want to continue to like I'm if I was a fan. If I was a season ticket holder, I'd say I'm not coming to a game until I watch the right quarterback play.
And the thing I'll add the Trey Ford effect. The thing that I like about the kid, he gets benched, and then as soon as he comes onto the field, he does positive stuff. He doesn't come on the field carrying the burden of, oh, they wouldn't play me. He sets that aside and does what he did yesterday. It's not the first time he's done that after being sat for a few games. We've seen him do it. You and I have seen him do it. It's part of the reason I think why we support him so much is because when he's finally been given a chance, after sitting on the sidelines and even worse, not even dressing, he comes out and he does a pretty good job. And I don't know what it was about Jones. I don't know what it was about the offensive coordinators that have been there the past few years. I don't understand why, they yanked him so fast. If it's the reason that you said, as far as confidence is concerned, at some point you've got to let a guy blow through that. He's got to break through. And he's not going to break through sitting on the sidelines and or sitting in the locker room or walking on with his civvies on the sideline. That's not going to help him. Now he's done this. Will they build on it? And whether it's he deserves credit for Javon Leak or Javon Leak deserves credit for Trey Ford or not, I don't know which it is. I don't know which one is the positive impact on. I can't sit here and prove it, but what I can say is together they did a pretty good job. And guess what football is? It's a team sport. So you got a kid that plays well, with a running back, and they've got the formula. How many times have we said, and I know it's a little different nowadays, and it's not as impactful as it was in the past, but without a running game, where's a football offense without a running game? We saw it last night with the Argos. I'm not going back to that game, but I'm just saying, without a running game, offenses don't work. They're based on the running game opens up the pass.
Yeah, because teams can't just sit back and say, okay, throw it. Now the team's going to be, all right, we're going to run it. Come and meet us and run and keep us from running the ball.
Yeah,
That's really been an issue for Edmonton. It was, we know that you guys are not really running the football, so we're just going to hope you throw the ball and make a mistake. And unfortunately, we've known McLeod Bethel Thompson enough to know he's prone to making mistakes. Now, it's not all his choice, and it's not all his fault, but that's inevitable for quarterbacks, right? When you're not able to have a run game support you and take the pressure off of you, right? We don't have a Nathan Rourke who can sit there and throw the ball 40 times and make plays and even run the ball as well as he did, right? Trey Ford can do a little bit of that, but Trey Ford only threw the ball 22 times in that game.
Well, you notice when they talk, like I said, we follow the Argos as close as anybody. When they talk about Dukes and his elusiveness, that's one of his key elements that people talk about that makes him a good quarterback. So Trey Ford does that, right? And then you give him a decent running back, and you saw what happened. And, as much as maybe Saskatchewan, their offense might be called into question now because of a backup quarterback, one thing you can't call into question is their defense. And what Trey Ford and the Elks did to the Saskatchewan defense, I know there's a lot of jaws dropped on a lot of Green Rider fans whose jaws were dropped at the end of that game, who could not believe what they saw in Saskatchewan, by the way.
Yeah, the House of Horrors, right? The Argos found that out a few weeks ago, and a lot of teams have found that out this year. But I think that was also apparent too. Was, man, that just did not really work out for Saskatchewan. Again, backup quarterback and things like that. You can make those. I mean, they're not going to make that excuse themselves. But you look at why it was so impressive for Edmonton. It was. They were just following their game plan. They were just letting their quarterback do what he needed to do. Right? It wasn't like they were doing any trick plays or anything like that. They were just executing. I think that was the big thing too, is finding a way to execute, and leave it to the other team to try to stop you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Edmonton, well-earned victory, their first of the season. They raised their record to 1-7, and then we've got the Montreal Alouettes Hamilton Tiger Cats game. The Montreal Alouettes, major point that we talked about earlier. You were hinting at it anyway, that it's less about a starting quarterback, but an effective quarterback. Alexander's a backup quarterback. Montreal had no problem generating offense.
Well, it's because they have finally found players to make plays. Tyson Philpott, right now he is my early candidate for Canadian of the Year.
Absolutely.
Maybe even MOP. I think he'll get a little play of that because he's a Canadian as well. That's always usually the case. I look at Montreal right now, and it's not pretty without Fajardo. It definitely isn't, but it's good enough. And that's what they are looking for right now. They have kind of everything kind of working in all three phases that we were talking about.
Well, especially that, because my stat that I love the most, and when it comes to quarterbacks, is TDs, interceptions, was 1-1. So he had an iffy performance, because for me that is the key for quarterbacks. But the fact is, he didn't lose the game for the team, and that's what you want from a guy who's carrying the ball for the starter. Very good work. He's done very good work. And to your point, you're 100% right. The work that he did is based on the instructions that he's given by his team, and those instructions are good enough to give him a chance to look good, to be good, to help the team win. And that's what you're referring to, not making excuses for the quarterback, yada yada. The rest of the team has a responsibility as well. It's easy to say the defense because that's standard. That's standard fare. We always talk about how many times have we talked about a team. The only reason they won is because of their defense. But in this case, their defense is as good as it is, but the offense didn't lose the game for them. That's what we saw with the Toronto game against Calgary.
Yeah.
And this one here, the Alouettes team is a championship team. They're proving that they do what it takes to win. And finally, my last comment is a resurgent Hamilton Tiger Cat team that last week looked like a dominant CFL team. Well, they were down to purring against Montreal. They're still that good a team, but that's how dominant Montreal is within the Canadian Football League, not just the East Division.
Well, I think Hamilton also just took advantage of a really bad Elks team as well. Like they needed to. There was a little bit of that, but at the same time, you go and you beat the team no matter what the record is. You have to go out and play the game.
You have to win.
Right? I look at Hamilton. That's a team that's improving. That's a team that's making plays. They're finding playmakers as well. That's always been a concern of mine. Do they have enough playmakers on that offense, especially? But I look at Montreal. It's impressive because they're doing it, and you're wondering, is there like they get that loss, but because a lot of that they beat themselves. Fajardo gets hurt. Caleb Evans wasn't really up to the task. I look at what they're doing now, Montreal, and they're rallying. It's a good locker room. Jason Moss, probably should be coach of the year at this rate.
For sure. The guy learned from history. I said for years when he was on the sidelines with Edmonton that he tended to let his temper get the best of him. You remember at the Grey Cup, I talked to him about it, and he admitted. He said, I changed my attitude. I realized that the anger wasn't getting him, but he uses it as fuel. And that's the great thing about football and players and coaches too. You learn from your mistakes. You adjust. It's the game of adjustments. And if you adjust properly, you get rewarded. And he was rewarded with a Grey Cup because his attitude changed in the sense that he felt his anger, but he used it to fuel being a better coach as opposed to letting the top come off his head. I admire what he did. I admire the change personally with him as a coach, not personally because I don't know him personally, but as a coach personally. I love what he did. He's a great example of passion under control, and it's made him a really great quarterback. And I agree 100% that he should or could be the coach of the year. He could have been last year, but unfortunately, the work that he did was in the playoffs. So the voting ends before the playoffs.
Right, and so that's it too, right? And also tough to go up against a coach that only lost 2 games last year as well. Which Ryan Dinwiddie did. So I think that's what also made it tough. But I do agree that we're watching a really good, really well coached Montreal team. We'll see if they can maintain it. We always know that it's not how you start, it's how you finish in the league. But I think right now with the way Montreal is being coached, it's really impressive to see what they've done.
The last game of Week 9, the BC Lions, Winnipeg Jets. BC went into Winnipeg. I think it would have been safe to say. I know the betting line must have favored BC, and common sense would have benefited BC. But I don't think anybody went into that game thinking that Winnipeg was going to win 25-0.
Yeah, I was talking with some people, and I said I don't remember the last time a team got shut out.
2021 for them particularly, BC, and it happened to be Winnipeg.
And that Winnipeg defense, I mean, they show you were I wasn't at the game, unfortunately, against Toronto, due to other prior commitments. But you saw and you kind of started to see a team regaining its identity a little bit defensively. And
They lost a game they could have won.
yeah, they definitely lost a game they could have won. And I think they're gonna continue this on the backs of their defense. The defense is going to lead the charge. I think they're realizing that there is a identity to this team right now. There is a method to the madness of how they need to play in order to have success. We'll see if they can continue it. How much this defense could lead the charge with the offense not exactly performing at its best, but it's going to work as long as they allow them to.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered everything. Just one last thing I'm going to say. Thursday, Saskatchewan, Ottawa. Friday, Calgary and Toronto. Saturday, Hamilton in Montreal. And Sunday, BC and Edmonton. Another good slate of games for Week 10. Can you believe we're in Week 10? We're halfway through the season, David.
It's unreal. I'm telling you, summertime, you enjoy it while you can. You enjoy these months while you got them.
Absolutely. Well, it's been hot, that's for sure. And so have these games. David, thank you for doing this as usual.
Glad to be back.
For David Morassutti, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk airing live Mondays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make that 4 p.m. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network for CFL Talk, other news, sports, and programming we offer. Please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it here, read it, download it, live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to Candid Frank Stanisci on YouTube. See you next week.